right in. First of all, I'd like to thank the audience for joining our webinar today, Reduce TCO and Optimize Your Data Footprint with Data Management Best Practices. I'm Miranda Burke, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at S&P and your host for today. Our webcast will be 30 minutes long, and we are being recorded, and the link will be sent to all the registrants after the presentation today. Questions can be asked at any time via the chat function on the side of your screen, and we'll answer them throughout the presentation and also at the end. And as you know, you have the flexibility to adjust the screen, and you can find that expand button right in the middle of your screen directly below the speaker boxes. All right, I would like to introduce my colleague today. We have Lyle Vandelaar, who is going to be our speaker. He's our transformation consultant here at S&P. And Lyle, with that, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Miranda. Well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to present this webinar to you today. So I guess we'll just jump right in. So today we're talking about reducing your TCO and optimizing your data footprint with our data management best practices, right? Best practice solutions that we have. So questions that we're hearing from the field, from the customers, right, is we want to reduce the size of our SAP system and on HANA, right? So the thing is, people are preparing to migrate to HANA, and the cost of running the appliances in HANA, they want to reduce the cost of that hardware, so get a smaller footprint, right? We also want to make sure that we keep the data accessible. We want to sort of reduce data wherever we can, but keep that data accessible. And we want to manage conflicting requirements, right? So reduce the data size, but keep the data accessible, manage access or speed to the data and so forth. And like we said, manage the costs for keeping this data accessible, not in primary storage, but in secondary storage. And how do we do that? So, whatever your road to HANA is, typical question that we're hearing is, or things that we're seeing in the systems is, up to 48% of your data is not used frequently, right? So you may have a system that's 10, 12, 15 years old. The only data you're actively using might be the last 2, 3, or 4 years. And the data beyond that, we can actually manage to slide off your main system and yet maintain access to it, but it reduces the size of your primary footprint, right? We also you see people have an average of about 30% growth in the system per year. And you find that 6 out of 10 of the largest tables have no current business value. Here's an example of the growth in the system that we see. Is if we do not put archiving into a live system, we see this is the typical growth of the system, how it grows, and that's your cost of your storage, you're managing your environment. So it's growing at a pretty good clip, not necessarily exponentially, but growing at a very steady pace. If we do implement archiving, we will talk about that, we can actually reduce your data footprint in your primary database. So your cost of running that primary database, your primary database environment, actually is reduced quite significantly. So these are the savings that can be implemented. This is an example from a real customer where the savings in the 5th year is a pretty substantial cost savings. You see that's almost $853,000. That's in the year, but over the 5 years accumulated up to that, they saved $2.8 million, which is a fairly significant number. So if we talk about one of the solutions we're talking about today, we're talking about archiving. So a typical solution here is we have what we call business objects, which is an umbrella term for the way that we handle data. It's not business objects as in a BobJ reporting, but the collections of data in the system. We take these objects, we archive them, and we've basically written out archive files, and we have a choice through our archive link interface to go to approximately 30 plus different target storage solutions, Cloudera, AWS, Azure. You can even put on a separate SQL server. You can go to Snowflake. And So all of this data is taken out of your primary database, but it is still accessible for reporting. See, this arrow goes both ways. You write the data out, you can still read the data back in, but it reduces the size of your primary database, which, like I said, in preparation for migration to HANA, can be a huge cost savings for those HANA appliances. We're able to go into your systems with your permission, of course. You can load an analysis tool of ours, pull the data back at the macro level where we do some analysis, and we'll get an example where we'll pull out all of your top tables and show you the distribution of data across all of your top tables. And then on the right-hand side, these are the objects that we spoke of. So, for example, an object such as FI document in this particular customer, was 180, or 1.8 terabytes, which represented 82% of their total data, with a significant data reduction potential. But two of the big factors that we need to consider when we do archiving is the two main features are residency versus retention. And residency is how much data do I want to keep in my system? So, for example, I mentioned before, we may only want to keep 3 years or 4 years current in the system. You may have 12 or 15 years worth of data in the system, and you may choose to keep only 3 or 4 years resident. Then the retention is once that data is moved out of the system onto these alternate storage platforms, how long do we keep it? Different businesses have different requirements. Pharmaceuticals, for example, may want to keep that data for 99 years. Depending on your line of business, you may only want to keep that for 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years. And we can govern that retention by company code. So you can say by company code, how long do we want to keep that data? And at the same time, we can also implement what's called a legal hold. So if there is a particular set of data for which you have a legal hold, yes, you can archive it and get out of your primary system, but you won't delete it. It won't meet its retention requirement while that legal hold is still in place. Once the legal hold is released, we can go ahead and delete that to meet your retention requirements. And I want to talk about another solution, which is our DataFridge solution, where we talk about managing a system that is no longer used on a day-to-day basis. So you might have taken an old system that you upgraded from a previous release to a newer release, you're keeping as a reference, or you might have done a company merge or a company carve out, or you might have done a migration to HANA, but you want to keep that old system around, or auditors want to keep it around for reporting, but you don't necessarily want to keep a full-fledged SAP system running all of the time. So we have the ability to access data from your legacy system without keeping that whole SAP legacy system up and running. You can still access your data using the SAP GUI. You can, of course, develop custom reports to run against it. Your TCO goes down significantly by not running this full system anymore. And this is validated and confirmed by people such as KPMG. They've certified our solution to meet business requirements. So with this decommissioning, which is a shutting down of a old reference system that you want to read data from, but you're not using day-to-day transactions in. So this is basically retiring of your central decommissioning, and we can actually decommission multiple systems. Not only you may have ECC plus CRM plus BW, you might have multiple ECCs. If you had multiple different company codes in different systems, but you've since run a merge into a central system, each of those individual ECC systems might be hanging around, and we can decommission those. The access to that data, the security is still managed via pretty much standard roles as we're used to seeing in SAP today. We do still honor, as I said, the legal hold and retention management. So even though we shut your system down and move the data out, we can still honor those retention requirements and say, hey, this company code only needs data up to 10 years old. So once it reaches 11 years old, we can delete that data for you. And we still maintain pretty high performance on retrieving and accessing this data. Another thing is, if you choose a storage solution, let's say for argument's sake, you went to Azure, but you change your mind 3 years down the road, you want to go to AWS, we can help you with that migration also. So it's not like you're stuck with a vendor once you choose them. So we're just showing here, we have a central system that we use to manage all of your systems. You may have multiple source systems on the left. Like I said, you might have had multiple systems for different company codes that you acquired and were running. You might have subsequently merged those into a single system, but the old systems remain running as these somewhat dormant systems. We can manage this all through a central system, take that data, move it out to any one of these target solutions that we may have. You can still access your data via a SAP GUI to go ahead, and you can also use third-party systems to access that data, so you can see the data that is removed out of the decommissioned system. Even though the data is decommissioned, you still have the ability to browse and view that data. You have very much SE16-like tables for browsing. It's not exactly SE16, but very similar to it. You get used to the interfaces very, very quickly. There's also a browser. We have an HTML browser for going through that. We also allow you to run very much similar to your standard SAP reports. You can run your SAP transactions to view this data. As I said, there's also different third-party tools you can add on to view and to browse that data. It's always compliant for retention for data and documents, so we can set up and maintain your retention rules. We can cover your legal holds, and we also provide your data destruction, right? Once your data meets its end of life, that 10 or 12 year time period, whatever your business needs. So your decommissioning is really a simple solution to decommission a legacy SAP system, that's after a move to HANA or any other, system consolidation that you might have had. It is compliant with, it's been validated and certified by KPMG. You still have full access to all of that data. You still have your normal access controls. And of course, the cost reduction is significant because now you're going to cheaper storage in the target rather than running a real live active SAP system and all of the costs associated with that. So just then to summarize, the difference between the two solutions, right, is your decommissioning is on a read-only system, which is typically an older system. Your goal here is to shut down and remove your hardware and minimize your licensing and network and sustainment expenses around all of these, but your data remains accessible. So your data becomes read-only, it's not active. It's typically for something that has infrequent access from a small group of users. You don't have 150 users reading this data all of the time, but it's occasional read use for this data. If you had previously archived files, if you had archived data out of your system previously, we can ensure that that data is brought over and it's still readable and accessible in a decommissioned system. And it can remove all your master data and attachments. Now, archiving, as opposed to decommissioning, archiving is run on an active system. So this is a real life system that you're using, every day. Like I said, you may be carrying that 12 or 15 years worth of data, but you only want to carry 3 years or 3 or 4 years worth of current data. So we can reduce that data footprint, reduces that database size, and subsequently when you go to HANA, you need a much smaller appliance to run this system. You still maintain your normal frequent access to the data by all of your users. Your archive data can be reformulated. The one thing though is your archive data is typically your transactional data is then read-only. It is no longer accessible for update mode. That's why we take the old data and we do ensure when we run the archiving process that your transactions are business complete. So if any record is flagged as business not complete, we hold on to that. But for the business complete records, they're all moved out to the archive. And like I said, they're no longer in an update mode, they're read only. And the other thing is master data is typically not accessed, well, typically not archived, right? That's kept in your primary system. So it's just for transactional data that's archived out. So we have done this with multiple customers that have had great success with this. At Kellogg's, we were able to archive BW ECC systems and store archive data in the AWS S3 buckets with significant data savings. And as you see, that's a major customer name. Another major customer name is Walmart, right? We were also able to move data out and move the attachments out to Microsoft Azure Blobs. This was done, of course, to save costs and reduce the database size for future migrations. Again, significant data reduction makes the ease of managing the day-to-day operation so much easier. Sony Music, we use the Data Fridge tool to decommission old systems, but they can still read the data from those old systems, but they've reduced the cost of ownership significantly. Dow Chemicals as well, we had multiple systems, over 42 terabyte data that we got decommissioned. So again, those systems are not needed day to day, but they can still read their data. And as you see, these are major customer names out in industry that we've had great success with. So basically, the value proposition is, we have this 100% successful track record with over 14,500 projects with 100% success rate. The software guided procedures ensure quality. We always do data validation before and after, our source and targets to ensure that everything and all the records counts match. And again, it's certified by major authorities. We have a flexible approach with our Bluefield solution, and multiple guiding principles to guide us on how we work and keep track of this, and we work with you to move and manage this data. We have a standardized approach, which is a well-practiced, well-executed approach that we've done with many people. So we're not inventing the process every time on the fly. We work with you and we execute our standard approach to get these processes executed. We have a very strong platform. We have, as we said, we've done this many times. We have many successful stories, many success stories, and great customer satisfaction results. That's it in a nutshell. Thank you for listening, and Miranda, I hand it back to you.
Yes, Lyle, thank you. Lots of great information jam-packed into 30 short minutes. The Q&A chat is bustling right now, so let me just dive right into it. Custom reports can be developed in which language? So
ABAP, of course, is the first one, and then I'm going to have to get back to you with the full set of third-party add-ons, but of course you can use ABAP to go after this data. And then that's for the case of decommissioned. In the case of archived data, which is in a live system, standard transaction will read the archived data. And then there's also SE16 and SE16-like browsers to read that archived data.
Excellent. Is the decommissioned data stored as ADK files or plain data?
It's not plain. It's not exactly ADK. ADK is for the archive. The decommissioned is in a slightly different format, but it is, what's the word I want? It's not clear text. You cannot just read it. You do need to use our tools and our interfaces to read that data.
Great, thank you. How can we ensure that our data management practices align with industry-specific data retention requirements?
So you have to work with your business and your data retention team to define what your data retention requirements are. And like I said, we can manage that at the company code level. So you may have company code, I'll make up a number, company code 1000, you want to keep your data for 10 years. The company code 2000, you only want to keep it for 8 years. And there's a configuration rules we can set up. We work with you once we understand your retention rules. we configure it in the system, and we use those rules to manage the retention destruction of data once it meets that destruction date. If you have a destruction date, like I said, some businesses want to keep the data in perpetuity, but if you do have rules for destruction, we work with you and your business to come up with those rules. We set up those rules typically at the company code level to destroy that data after its retention period.
Great, thank you. Can you elaborate further on retiring read-only SAP systems would impact, and how would this report our reporting capabilities?
So by retiring a read-only system, so that's our decommissioning tool, we have that interface system that sits in the middle. We have a tool set that will take your data and sunset it out of your primary SAP system, and we put it in a data repository of your choice. Like I said, we have about 30 plus storage vendors. The data sits there, but we have an interface that sits in the middle that allows us to read that data. So we still have ABAP reports that can be written against that to read the data, as well as there is provision for third-party tools to read that. But we can read the data and present it back to you through a SAP GUI interface, unless, of course, the data has met its retention expiration, in which case it is expired, and then physically deleted at the storage level. But the data that's not expired, you can typically access that through SE16-like browsers and through ABAP transactions that are very, very closely mimic the standard SAP transactions for reading that. And many of those are pre-canned and built by us. And we can work with you to show you how to build additional reports if you need them.
Great, thank you, Lyle. Any other questions from the audience today? Right. With that, I would like to conclude the webinar today. I do want to thank the audience for your time. We'll be sending out the PowerPoint and the recording via email. Additionally, I'll include other resources like blog posts and customer success stories you can peruse at your leisure. I'd also like to make you aware we are sponsoring the ASUG SAP for Utilities event taking place in Chicago, October 9th through the 11th. So if you are attending or know a colleague that will be on site, I invite you to stop by the S&P booth number 104 to say hello. All right, and with that, Lyle, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation, and thank you to the audience today. We'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you, everyone.